The courtroom fell silent when the janitor stood up and yelled, "I will defend her!" His mop clattered to the floor. Every lawyer, every journalist, every spectator turned to stare at the man in the faded maintenance uniform, a nobody who dared to speak where only the powerful belonged. Across the room, the billionaire CEO on trial for fraud looked up, tears streaming down her face. She had lost everything, her lawyers, her reputation, her empire. But she was about to gain something far more valuable, the truth. Jacob Lane had forgotten what hope felt like. It had been 3 years since his wife Sarah died. 3 years since cancer took her in the spring, leaving him with a mortgage he couldn't pay, a 6-year-old daughter who asked when mommy was coming home, and a law degree he'd never finished. The degree hung in a frame in Emma's bedroom now, gathering dust above her bookshelf. She liked to point at it and say, "That's Daddy when he was smart." He'd smile and kiss her forehead. "I'm still smart, baby girl. I just push a mop now instead of papers." But some nights when Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, Jacob would stand at the window and wonder what version of himself had died along with Sarah. The man who believed in justice. The man who thought the system could be fair. The man who memorized case law like poetry and dreamed of arguing before the Supreme Court. That man was gone. What remained was a father who worked the night shift at the Manhattan Federal Courthouse, mopping marble floors and emptying trash bins while lawyers in $1,000 suits stepped around him like he was invisible. And Jacob had learned to be invisible. He'd learned that if you kept your head down, if you worked quietly, if you never looked anyone in the eye, you could disappear into the background of the world. You could become part of the furniture, unnoticed, unremarkable, safe. But being invisible had unexpected advantages. People said things around janitors they'd never say around other lawyers. They dropped documents into trash cans without shredding them first. They held whispered conversations in hallways, assuming the man with the mop couldn't possibly understand words like derivative action or fiduciary breach. Jacob understood every word. He couldn't help it. His brain still worked the way it had in law school, cataloging, analyzing, connecting dots that others missed. It was a reflex, like breathing. Even while his hands pushed a mop, his mind was filing away fragments of cases, memorizing patterns, noticing inconsistencies. Most of the time it didn't matter. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. It started with a paper jam. Jacob had been cleaning the third-floor conference room, the one the big corporate defense teams used for late-night strategy sessions. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the room was empty except for the usual debris, half-drunk coffee cups, scattered legal pads, a whiteboard covered in flowcharts someone had forgotten to erase, and a shredder that was jammed and blinking red. Jacob sighed. This wasn't technically his job, but he knew if he left it, some attorney would complain in the morning, and Margaret from facilities would get yelled at, and she didn't deserve that. Margaret brought him Christmas cookies every year and asked about Emma. So he knelt down, opened the shredder's mouth, and began extracting the mangled paper. The document was expensive high-grade linen stock, the kind used for official contracts. As Jacob pulled it free, smoothing out the creases, he couldn't help but glance at the text. Confidential amendment to executive compensation agreement. Party A Stormtech Industries. Party B. Vivian Storm, CEO. Jacob's pulse quickened. He knew this case. Everyone in the courthouse knew this case. Vivian Storm, the woman they called the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley, was on trial for the biggest corporate fraud scandal in a decade. The prosecution claimed she'd embezzled $47 million through fake contracts and offshore accounts. Her company Stormtech had developed groundbreaking medical AI technology, but now it was all going down in flames. The trial had been going on for 6 weeks, and the media was having a field day. Every day, the courthouse steps were packed with reporters shouting questions as Vivian arrived in her tailored suits and dark sunglasses, her expression carved from stone. Jacob had seen her a few times, had mopped the hallway outside courtroom 12, while her legal team filed in and out. She never looked at him. Nobody did. But this document... Jacob's eyes scanned the text, and his law school training kicked in automatically. Something was wrong. The language was off, too formal, too rigid. American corporate contracts had a certain rhythm, a certain structure. This read like it had been translated. He flipped to the signature page. There in the footer was a notation so small, most people would have missed it. Document formatted per Zurich Commercial Standards. ZCS Rev. 2019, Zurich, Switzerland. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Why would a contract between an American CEO and her American company be formatted according to Swiss standards? Stormtech had no European operations. Vivian Storm had never worked in Switzerland. He shouldn't care. This wasn't his business. He was a janitor, not a lawyer. He should shred this document properly and forget he'd ever seen it. But his hands were already reaching for his phone. He photographed every page, 17 in total. Then, he carefully fed the document into the shredder, watched it turn to confetti, and went back to mopping. That night after his shift ended, Jacob sat in his beat-up Honda Civic in the courthouse parking garage and read through the photos. The more he read, the more wrong it felt. The contract gave Vivian Storm a massive bonus $12 million for restructuring services rendered. But the date was suspicious, March 15, 2023. That was 3 months before Stormtech announced its breakthrough AI diagnostic tool. 3 months before the stock price tripled. If this contract was real, it meant Vivian had been paid a fortune right before her company became wildly successful. The prosecution would call that insider trading, fraud, theft. But if this contract was fake... Jacob rubbed his eyes. The sun was starting to rise, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of pink and gold. He needed to sleep. He needed to pick Emma up from his sister's place. He needed to stop thinking like a lawyer and start acting like a father who couldn't afford to lose his job. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something important. Something that could change everything. For 2 weeks, Jacob kept his discovery to himself. He watched the trial from the sidelines, mopping hallways and emptying trash while the prosecution built their case brick by brick. They had documents. They had bank records. They had a star witness, Paul Temple, Vivian Storm's former executive assistant, who testified that he'd personally watched her sign off on fraudulent transfers. Paul Temple was young, charismatic, devastated. He cried on the witness stand as he described how Vivian had manipulated him, used him, made him complicit in her crimes. The jury ate it up. The media loved him. Even the judge seemed moved. And Vivian Storm sat at the defense table like a statue carved from ice, her face betraying nothing. Her legal team was a disaster. Jacob could see it from a mile away. Her lead attorney, Marcus Webb, a slick corporate defender from a white shoe firm, barely looked at her. He went through the motions, cross-examining witnesses without passion, objecting without conviction. Jacob had seen enough trials to recognize when a lawyer had already given up. Then, on a Friday afternoon in late September, the bomb dropped. Jacob was mopping the corridor outside courtroom 12 when he heard raised voices. The doors burst open, and Marcus Webb strode out. His face red, his jaw tight. Behind him, 2 junior associates hurried to keep up their arms full of file boxes. "We're done," Webb snapped into his phone. "Yes, done. I'm not going down with this ship. She's guilty. Everyone knows it, and I'm not sacrificing my reputation for..." He stopped mid-sentence as he nearly collided with Jacob. "Watch it," Webb snarled, stepping around him like he was garbage on the sidewalk. Jacob kept his head down, kept mopping, but his mind was racing. They'd abandoned her. Her own lawyers had quit. The media frenzy that followed was immediate and brutal. Storm's defense team quits mid-trial. Ice Queen melts as lawyers flee. Vivian Storm abandoned, no one left to defend Billionaire CEO. Jacob read the headlines on his phone during his lunch break, sitting on a bench in Foley Square. Around him, food trucks served tacos and halal chicken to the lunchtime crowd. Pigeons pecked at crumbs. Life went on. But in Courtroom 12, a woman's entire existence was being dismantled piece by piece, and now she didn't even have anyone to speak for her. The trial was scheduled to resume Monday morning. The judge had given Vivian Storm the weekend to find new representation, but every legal expert agreed it was hopeless. No reputable attorney would touch this case. It was career suicide. Jacob thought about the document in his phone, the one with the Zurich formatting. He'd done more research in the past 2 weeks, staying up late after Emma went to bed using the courthouse's law library when no one was around. He'd found something. The metadata. Every digital document carried hidden information: creation dates, modification dates, IP addresses. Jacob had managed to extract the metadata from the PDF version of the amendment contract that had been entered into evidence. The document claimed to have been created on March 15, 2023, in New York. But the metadata told a different story. The file had actually been created on June 2, 2023, 3 months later, and the IP address traced back to Zurich, Switzerland. Someone had forged the document and backdated it. Someone was framing Vivian Storm. Jacob knew he should report this to someone. The judge, the prosecutor. But who would listen to a janitor who would take him seriously? And if he came forward, he'd have to explain how he'd obtained the original document. He'd have to admit he'd kept evidence. He could lose his job. Worse, he could be accused of tampering with a federal case. He had Emma to think about. He had rent to pay. He had everything to lose. But that weekend, as Jacob watched Emma color pictures at their tiny kitchen table, chattering about her friend Sophie's birthday party and the science project she wanted to do about butterflies, he thought about Sarah. Sarah who'd believed in him even when he'd wanted to quit law school. Sarah who'd said, "You're going to help people, Jacob. You're going to make sure the truth matters." Sarah who'd made him promise in those final weeks that he'd teach Emma to be brave. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Emma asked, looking up with those huge brown eyes, Sarah's eyes. "Nothing, sweetheart," Jacob said, but his voice cracked. "You look sad." He knelt down beside her chair, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Em, if you knew something was wrong, if you knew someone was being hurt, and you could help them, would you be brave enough to speak up? Even if it was scary?" Emma thought about this seriously, her crayon poised over a half-colored butterfly. "Mommy said being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." Jacob felt his throat tighten. Yeah, she did. "So yes," Emma said firmly, "I would be brave." She went back to coloring, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that she'd just changed her father's life. Monday morning arrived like a countdown to an execution. Jacob dropped Emma at school, kissed her goodbye 3 times, and drove to the courthouse with his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd barely slept. He'd changed his mind 17 times. He'd written and deleted a dozen emails to the court clerk. But he'd also printed out the metadata analysis. He'd organized the evidence. He'd rehearsed what he'd say. He was going to do this. He was going to speak up, even if it destroyed him. The courtroom was packed when Jacob arrived. Journalists, spectators, legal observers, all waiting to watch Vivian Storm's final humiliation. She sat alone at the defense table, her posture perfect, her hands folded in front of her. She'd worn a simple black suit today, no jewelry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like she was attending her own funeral. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, and everyone rose. "Please be seated," the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Storm, I understand your legal team has withdrawn from this case. Have you secured new representation?" Vivian stood slowly. "No, Your Honor." "Do you wish to represent yourself?" For the first time, Jacob saw her composure crack. Her voice wavered. "Your Honor, I don't know what to do. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand how—" "Then I'm afraid I have no choice but to appoint a public defender to—" "Your Honor." The voice came from the back of the courtroom. Jacob's voice. He'd stood up without thinking, without planning, the words ripping out of him like they had a will of their own. Every head turned. 300 people stared at the janitor in the maintenance uniform, mop and bucket still in hand, from his morning rounds. The judge's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me." Jacob's legs felt like water, but he forced himself to walk forward down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. He could feel the cameras turning toward him, the reporters whispering, the prosecution team exchanging confused glances. He reached the barrier that separated the gallery from the well of the court and stopped. "Your Honor," he said, and he was amazed his voice worked at all. "I need to speak." "Young man, this is a federal courtroom, not—" "I know what this is," Jacob interrupted, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. Your Honor, I apologize, but I have evidence. Evidence that could change this entire case." The judge's expression sharpened. "What evidence? Who are you?" "My name is Jacob Lane. I work here. I'm the night janitor." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Someone in the press section actually guffawed. But Jacob didn't look away from the judge. "I used to be a law student," he continued, his voice steady now. "I know how this system works, and I know that Ms. Storm is being framed." The laughter died. The prosecution shot to their feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This man has no standing, no credentials, no—" "Let him speak," Vivian Storm said. Everyone turned to stare at her. She was looking at Jacob for the first time, really looking at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but there was something else there now. A flicker of hope, so fragile it hurt to see. "Please," she whispered, "let him speak." Judge Morrison studied Jacob for a long moment. He could see her calculating, weighing, deciding whether this was a circus stunt or something real. Finally, she nodded. "Approach the bench, Mr. Lane." Jacob's hands were shaking as he opened the folder he'd been clutching. He walked forward past Vivian Storm, who was watching him like he was a hallucination. He reached the judge's bench and handed up the documents. "This is a confidential amendment to Ms. Storm's employment contract," he said. "The prosecution entered it as Exhibit 47B. It supposedly shows that Ms. Storm authorized a $12 million bonus for herself 3 months before StormTech's breakthrough, which the prosecution argues is evidence of insider trading and fraud." "I'm aware of this document," the judge said dryly. "Continue." "Your Honor, this document is a forgery." The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order. Order in this court." When the noise subsided, she looked at Jacob. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Lane. What's your evidence?" Jacob took a breath. This was it. No turning back. The document was supposedly created on March 15, 2023 in New York. But the metadata, the hidden digital information embedded in the PDF file, shows it was actually created on June 2, 2023, 3 months later, and the IP address traces back to Zurich, Switzerland. He handed up a second set of papers. "This is the technical analysis. The creation timestamp, the modification history, the geolocation data. It's all here." The judge put on her reading glasses and studied the documents. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the journalists had stopped typing. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Morrison looked up. "Mr. Prosecutor, did your team verify this document's authenticity?" The lead prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman named Andrea Chen, looked like she'd been punched. "Your Honor, we received this document from a cooperating witness. We had no reason to believe." "Who was the witness?" "Paul Temple, Your Honor, Ms. Storm's former executive assistant." Jacob felt the puzzle pieces clicking into place in his mind. Paul Temple, the star witness. The man who'd cried on the stand about being manipulated. The man who'd had access to all of Vivian Storm's files, her passwords, her signature. "Your Honor," Jacob said quietly, I think you need to ask Mr. Temple where he was on June 2nd, 2023. Judge Morrison's eyes narrowed. Bailiff, locate Paul Temple immediately. The next 3 hours were chaos. The judge called a recess. The prosecution team huddled in emergency conference. The defense table, which now consisted of just Vivian Storm and somehow improbably Jacob Lane, sat in stunned silence. Why? Vivian finally asked. Her voice was barely audible. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Jacob looked at her, really looked at her. Up close, she wasn't the ice queen the media portrayed. She was just a woman in her late 30s, exhausted and terrified and utterly alone. I know what it's like, he said simply, to be buried alive by silence. Something cracked in Vivian's expression. I didn't do it, she whispered. I swear to God I didn't do any of it. But no one would listen. Everyone just assumed. I know, Jacob said. But I'm listening now. Tears spilled down her cheeks the first time she'd cried in public since the trial began. And in that moment, in a federal courtroom that smelled of furniture polish and old wood and fear, something shifted between them. A recognition. A connection. Two people who'd lost everything standing together in the rubble. When the trial resumed, the bailiff reported that Paul Temple was nowhere to be found. His apartment was empty. His phone was disconnected. His passport had been used to board a flight to Zurich at 6 a.m. that morning. He was gone. Judge Morrison's face was granite. Ms. Chen, it appears your star witness has fled the jurisdiction. Your Honor, we had no indication that Mr. Temple was... You relied entirely on the testimony of a man who has now fled to a non-extradition country, and you entered evidence that this court's janitor has demonstrated may be fraudulent. The judge's tone could have frozen nitrogen. I'm declaring a mistrial pending a full investigation into... No, Vivian said, standing abruptly. Your Honor, I don't want a mistrial. I want to fight this. I want my name cleared. Ms. Storm, without legal representation you cannot... Then I want him. Vivian pointed at Jacob. I want Jacob Lane to represent me. The courtroom exploded again. Jacob's heart stopped. Ms. Storm, the judge said when order was restored, Mr. Lane is not a licensed attorney. He cannot. He knows this case better than any lawyer in this room, Vivian said fiercely. He found what they all missed. He spoke up when everyone else walked away. If he's willing to stand with me, then I want him. Every eye in the courtroom turned to Jacob, the janitor, the widowed father, the man who'd given up on justice 3 years ago. He thought about Emma, about Sarah, about the version of himself he thought had died, and he realized it hadn't died. It had just been waiting for a moment like this. Your Honor. Jacob said, his voice clear and strong. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read every word of this case, every document, every testimony, and I know the truth when I see it. He turned to Vivian. If you'll have me, if you trust me, then yes. I'll defend you. Vivian's smile was broken and beautiful. Then we fight. Judge Morrison shook her head slowly, but there was something like admiration in her eyes. This is highly irregular. Against my better judgment. I'll allow Mr. Lane to assist in Ms. Storm's defense as a pro se legal advisor. But Ms. Chen, I'm also ordering your office to re-examine every piece of evidence in this case. If there's been misconduct, we will find it. The gavel fell, and Jacob Lane, night janitor, failed law student, single father, became the most unlikely defender in federal court history. As they filed out of the courtroom, Vivian caught his arm. Thank you, she said. I don't know what happens next, but thank you for seeing me. Jacob smiled. We're going to prove your innocence. But first, we need to find out who's really behind this. And I think I know where to start. Where? Switzerland, Jacob said. And a man named Martin Lyle. That night, Jacob sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers, while Emma did her homework across from him. The apartment was quiet except for the scratching of her pencil and the distant sound of sirens outside. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a life that had just been turned completely upside down. "Daddy, what's an adjective again?" Emma asked, chewing on the end of her eraser. Jacob looked up from the case file, his eyes struggling to refocus. A word that describes something, like brave, or smart, or beautiful. Like you're brave. His chest tightened. "I don't know about that, sweetheart. Sophie's mom said you yelled in court today. She saw it on the news." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact curious, but not judgmental. "She said you're famous now." Jacob rubbed his face. The news. Of course it had hit the news. By the time he'd picked Emma up from school, his phone had 17 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Reporters, probably. His sister had texted, "What the hell, Jacob, call me?" He hadn't called anyone back. He didn't know what to say. He'd gone from invisible to infamous in a single morning, and he still wasn't sure if he'd made the bravest decision of his life or the stupidest. "Did I do something bad?" Emma asked quietly. "What, no, baby, no." Jacob got up and knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. "You didn't do anything bad. I helped someone today. Someone who needed help. The lady on TV. The one they say is mean. She's not mean. She's just scared. And sometimes people are mean to other people when they're scared themselves." Emma processed this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old philosopher. "Are you scared?" Jacob thought about lying about being the strong father who never showed fear. But Sarah had taught him better than that. Sarah had said children needed to see that adults could be scared and brave at the same time. "Yeah," he admitted. "I'm pretty scared." "But you did it anyway." "Yeah." Emma hugged him suddenly fiercely, her little arms tight around his neck. "Mommy would be proud," she whispered. And Jacob held his daughter and tried not to cry. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "It's Vivian. Can we talk tomorrow morning before court?" He'd given her his number outside the courthouse, scribbling it on the back of a coffee receipt, because he didn't even have business cards. Now she was texting him at 8 p.m. like they were colleagues. Like this was normal. Nothing about this was normal. He texted back 7 a.m., Gray's Coffee on Worth Street. The reply came instantly, "Thank you, for everything." Jacob stared at those 3 words, "for everything," and wondered what he'd actually gotten himself into. The next morning, Jacob arrived at Gray's Coffee at 6:45 a.m., partly because he was always early, and partly because he wanted to be settled before Vivian arrived. The coffee shop was a hole-in-the-wall place that courthouse employees loved cheap fast and too cramped for the fancy lawyer crowd. Jacob ordered his usual black coffee and a hot chocolate for later just in case, and claimed a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. At exactly 7 a.m., the door opened and Vivian Storm walked in. She looked different. She'd traded her courtroom armor for jeans and a simple gray sweater. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer heels. She looked younger, like this vulnerable, almost ordinary. Almost. People still stared. Even dressed down, Vivian Storm carried herself like someone used to walking into rooms and commanding attention. But there was something else now. A wariness in her eyes, a tension in her shoulders. Like a wild animal that had been caged and was still learning to trust. She spotted Jacob and made her way over, sliding into the booth across from him. "You're early," she said. "Force of habit. You want coffee?" "God, yes." Jacob signaled the waitress and ordered 2 more coffees and a plate of pastries he couldn't really afford, but ordered anyway. When the waitress left, an awkward silence settled between them. In the courtroom, with adrenaline pumping and cameras rolling, it had been easy to be bold. Now, sitting across from each other in a dingy coffee shop at dawn, They were just two strangers trying to figure out what came next. "I didn't sleep," Vivian said finally. "I kept thinking about what you said, about Martin Lyle." Martin Lyle, the name that had been nagging at Jacob since he'd first seen that Zurich IP address. "Tell me about him," Jacob said. "Everything you know." Vivian wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "Martin runs Alter Holdings. It's a private equity firm. They buy struggling companies, strip them down, and sell the pieces for profit. 5 years ago, he approached me about acquiring StormTech. You said no. I said hell no. StormTech wasn't about making money. It was about saving lives. Our AI diagnostic tool could catch diseases years earlier than traditional methods. It could change medicine. I wasn't going to let some corporate vulture turn it into a profit machine." Her voice had gone hard passionate. This was the Vivian Storm the media loved to hate, fierce, uncompromising, unwilling to play nice. Jacob liked her better for it. "So Lyle had motive," he said. "If he couldn't buy your company, maybe he could destroy it and pick up the pieces for cheap." "But how? How would he even know how to forge those documents? How would he get access to my files? My signature? Paul Temple." Vivian flinched at the name. "Paul worked for me for 3 years. I trusted him. I thought he was loyal." Money changes people. Or maybe he was working for Lyle all along. The waitress arrived with the pastries. Neither of them touched the food. "I keep replaying everything in my head," Vivian said quietly, "looking for signs I missed. Paul was always so helpful, so eager to please. He volunteered to organize my files, to digitize old contracts, to handle my calendar. I thought he was just ambitious. He was gathering intelligence, learning your patterns, your signature style, your approval processes. When did he join your company?" 3.5 years ago, March 2021. Right after you rejected Lyle's acquisition offer. Vivian's face went pale. "You think Lyle planted him?" "I think we need to find out. We need to trace the connection between Paul Temple and Martin Lyle. Bank records, communications, anything that proves they were working together." "How Paul's gone? He's probably in some Swiss chalet right now celebrating." Jacob leaned forward. "Then we go to Switzerland." Vivian stared at him. "What? You said Paul fled to Zurich. That's not random. Lyle's there. Alter Holdings headquarters is there. If we're going to prove the conspiracy, we need to get the evidence from the source." "Jacob, I can't leave the country. I'm on trial. The judge would never allow it." "Not you. Me." The words hung in the air between them. Vivian shook her head slowly. "You can't afford a trip to Switzerland. You're a—" She stopped herself, but they both knew what she'd been about to say. "A janitor," Jacob finished for her. "I know what I am." "That's not what I meant. I just meant, you have a daughter. A job. You can't just fly to Europe on some wild investigation." "Then help me." Vivian's eyes widened. "What?" "You have resources, contacts, money. I have legal knowledge, and apparently a talent for noticing things other people miss. We work together. You fund the investigation, I do the legwork. That's not how this works. You can't just—" "Vivian." Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. "Yesterday, you sat alone in that courtroom, ready to accept whatever verdict they gave you. Today, you have a chance to fight back, but only if you trust me, only if we do this together." She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something, sincerity maybe, or proof that this wasn't some elaborate con. Whatever she found there, it must have been enough. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, we do this together." Jacob felt something shift in his chest, not quite hope, but close. "Then I need you to tell me everything about Alter Holdings, everything about Martin Lyle, every interaction you've had with him, every business deal, every rumor you've heard. I need the complete picture." Vivian nodded. "My apartment. I have files there, documents, old emails, Things my lawyers never even looked at because they didn't think it mattered. When? Today. After court. I'll have my car pick us up. Jacob thought about his shift at the courthouse, about the schedule he'd kept for 3 years without missing a single day. Then he thought about Emma's words. But you did it anyway. Okay, he said. Let's do it. They spent the next hour planning, strategizing, building the framework of their investigation. Vivian pulled out her phone and started making calls to her accountant, to her IT specialist, to her few remaining allies in the tech world. Jacob took notes on a legal pad, his law school training kicking back in like muscle memory. By the time they left for court, they weren't just a CEO and a janitor anymore. They were partners. The morning session was procedural motions and objections, and legal maneuvering that meant nothing to most of the spectators, but everything to Jacob. He sat beside Vivian at the defense table, acutely aware of every camera, every judgmental stare, every whispered comment about the janitor playing lawyer. But he kept his focus on Judge Morrison, on the prosecution's arguments, on the subtle shifts in tone and body language that told the real story beneath the legal jargon. The prosecution was rattled. Andrea Chen kept glancing at her team, at the empty witness chair where Paul Temple should have been, at the evidence folders that suddenly seemed less solid than they had a day ago. She was good at hiding it, but Jacob had learned to read people in the 3 years he'd spent being invisible. She was scared. When the judge called for lunch recess, Vivian's hand found Jacob's arm. "You see it too," she murmured. "They're going to offer a plea deal," Jacob said. "Probably today. They want to end this before the whole case falls apart." "What do we do?" "We say no." Vivian smiled, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her. "I like how you think." An hour later, Jacob was proven right. Andrea Chen approached them in the hallway outside the courtroom, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Storm, Mr. Lane, I'd like to propose a conversation about resolution." "No," Jacob said before Vivian could respond. Chen's eyebrows rose. "You haven't even heard the offer." "Don't need to. My client is innocent. We're not pleading to anything." "Mr. Lane, you're not even a lawyer. You have no idea what you're doing. If this case goes to the jury..." "Then we'll win," Jacob said calmly. "Because you have a cooperating witness who fled the country, forged evidence you never verified, and a narrative built on lies. You know it. We know it. And soon the jury will know it too." Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the frustration beneath. "You're making a mistake." "No," Vivian said, standing beside Jacob. "The mistake was thinking I wouldn't fight back." They walked away together, leaving the prosecutor standing in the empty hallway. That afternoon, true to her word, Vivian's car picked them up from the courthouse, a sleek black Tesla that looked absurdly out of place next to Jacob's beat-up Honda. The driver was a quiet man in his 50s, who didn't ask questions, just drove them through Manhattan traffic to an address in Tribeca. Vivian's apartment was nothing like Jacob expected. He'd imagined something cold, modern, full of expensive art and uncomfortable furniture. Instead, he walked into a space that felt lived-in, personal. Books everywhere, plants on the windowsills, photographs on the walls. There was a whole section devoted to what looked like family photos, Vivian as a child, smiling gap-toothed at the camera. Vivian in a college graduation gown. Vivian cutting the ribbon at Stormtech's headquarters, opening her face radiant with pride. "I know," Vivian said, watching him look around. "Not what you expected from the Ice Queen. I never thought you were that." "Everyone else does." She dropped her bag on the couch and headed toward a home office. "The media loves a villain. Woman CEO, ambitious, successful, won't smile for the cameras, must be cold, must be heartless. They never asked why I don't smile." Jacob followed her into the office. "Why don't you..." She was quiet for a moment, pulling file boxes from a closet. "Because my mother died when I was 8. Brain aneurysm. No warning, no symptoms, just gone. And I stood there thinking, if we'd known sooner, if someone had caught it earlier..." So I spent my whole life building technology to catch the things that hide in the shadows. To give people the warning my mother never got. And when I finally did it, when StormTech's AI started catching tumors and aneurysms years before traditional scans, I thought I'd finally done something that mattered. Her voice cracked. And then they took it all away. Jacob set down the box he'd been holding and crossed the room to her. We're going to get it back. Your company, your reputation, your life, all of it. You can't promise that. Watch me. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, spreading documents across the floor, building timelines, tracking connections. Vivian ordered Chinese food that arrived in enough containers to feed an army. Jacob called his sister to ask if Emma could stay overnight. It's an emergency, Jess. I promise I'll explain later. And kept working. Around midnight, buried in an old email archive, Jacob found it. Vivian, look at this. She crawled across the floor to peer over his shoulder at the laptop screen. It was an email from Paul Temple to an external address dated May 2023, a month before the forged document was created. Project Storm is proceeding as planned. Subject fully trusts me. Will have complete file access by end of month. Confirm wire transfer per our agreement. Oh my God, Vivian whispered. He called it Project Storm, like I was just a target. Jacob scrolled down to the email address, alterinvest, 2023, protonmail.com. Protonmail, encrypted anonymous, but look at the name, he pointed. Alter, as in Alter Holdings. Is that enough? Can we use this? It's a start, but we need more. We need proof that this email address belongs to Martin Lyle or someone at his company. We need the money trail. Jacob sat back, his mind racing. Vivian, do you have access to Paul's employment records, banking information, direct deposit details? StormTech's HR should have everything, but I can't access company files anymore. When I was indicted, the board locked me out of all systems. Who's on the board? 7 people. Most of them voted to suspend me. She pulled up a document on her phone. But there's one Richard Chen, our CFO. He abstained from the vote. He's worked with me since the beginning. If anyone would help. Jacob checked his watch. 12:30 a.m. Think he'd answer his phone right now. For this, maybe. 20 minutes later, they had Richard Chen on speakerphone. He sounded exhausted but alert, and when Vivian explained what they'd found, his shock was audible. Paul Temple was stealing from you this whole time, Jesus Vivian. I approved his bonuses. I gave him a glowing performance review. Rich, we need access to his personnel file, banking records, anything that shows money coming in from external sources. I can't just hand over employee records. There are privacy laws not to mention. Rich. Vivian's voice went quiet. They're destroying everything I built. Everything we built together. Please. A long silence. Then, I'll email you what I can find. Give me until morning. Thank you. Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. When she hung up, Jacob saw tears on her cheeks. Hey, he said gently. You okay? I forgot what it felt like to have someone believe me. Jacob wanted to say something comforting, something wise. Instead, he just reached out and squeezed her hand. Her fingers curled around his, holding on like he was an anchor in a storm. They fell asleep there on the office floor, surrounded by papers and empty food containers, still holding hands. Jacob woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. He sat up disoriented, his back screaming from sleeping on hardwood. Vivian was already awake, laptop open, eyes fixed on the screen. Richard came through, she said without looking up. Jacob, you need to see this. He crawled over, wincing at his protesting muscles. On the screen was a bank statement for Paul Temple. And there, highlighted in yellow, was a series of wire transfers. $15,000 every month for 3.5 years. From Alter Holdings AG Zurich. That's over $600,000. Jacob breathed. They paid him more than $500,000 to destroy you. There's more. Vivian clicked to another document. Richard found Paul's expense reports. Look at the travel. Jacob scanned the list. 3 trips to Zurich in the past year alone, all expenses paid by external consulting fees. He was meeting with them, planning this. And here. Vivian pulled up another file. Phone records. Look who Paul called 2 days after my indictment. The number had a Swiss country code. Jacob didn't recognize it, but Vivian did. That's Martin Lyle's private line. I had it from the acquisition negotiations. He gave it to me himself, said to call if I ever changed my mind about selling. Jacob sat back, the pieces clicking into place. So here's what happened. Lyle wanted your company. You refused. He planted Paul in your organization as a spy. Paul spent years gaining your trust, learning your systems, getting access to your files. Then when the time was right, he forged documents to make it look like you were embezzling. The goal was to tank your reputation, destroy Stormtech's value, and let Lyle buy the wreckage for pennies on the dollar. But it went wrong, Vivian said. The case got too public. I wouldn't take a plea deal. And then you found the metadata. So Paul ran, back to the people who paid him. They looked at each other, the weight of it settling between them. We need to get this to the judge, Vivian said. This proves Paul was bought and paid for. This proves Lyle was behind everything. It proves Paul took money from Lyle's company. A good defense attorney, which I'm not technically, could argue it was legitimate consulting work. We need more. We need something that directly ties Lyle to the forgeries, to the conspiracy. Then we go to Switzerland. Jacob nodded slowly. Then I go to Switzerland. Vivian corrected. We go together. Vivian, you can't. I'm going, Jacob. That's final. We'll petition the court. I have assets, I'm not a flight risk. Judge Morrison seems fair. She might allow it. Jacob wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. And honestly, she was right. He'd need her there, her knowledge of the company, her history with Lyle, her ability to spot inconsistencies in business documents. Okay, he said. We do it together. But first, we need to present this to the court. Today. An hour later, cleaned up and caffeine-fueled, they stood before Judge Morrison in her chambers. The judge listened impassively as Jacob laid out what they'd found, the emails, the wire transfers, the phone records. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to allow the defendant to leave the country, she said finally, during her trial, to pursue a theory that her former assistant and a Swiss businessman conspired to frame her. Yes, Your Honor. It sounds like a movie plot, Mr. Lane. I know how it sounds, but the evidence is real. Paul Temple received over $600,000 from Alter Holdings while working for Ms. Storm. That's not consulting fees. That's payment for corporate espionage. Judge Morrison looked at Vivian. Ms. Storm, do you understand the risk if you flee, if you don't return, I will issue a warrant for your arrest, and you will spend the rest of your life as a fugitive? I understand, Your Honor, but I'm not running from this. I'm running toward the truth. The judge studied them both, her expression unreadable. 3 days, she said finally. You have 3 days. If you're not back in this courtroom by Friday morning at 9 a.m., Ms. Storm, I will hold you in contempt and issue that warrant. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor, Vivian said. Thank you. As they left the chambers, Jacob felt the adrenaline singing through his veins. 3 days. 72 hours to fly to Switzerland, track down Martin Lyle, find proof of the conspiracy, and get back before the judge changed her mind. We're really doing this? Vivian said, a note of disbelief in her voice. Yeah, we really are. She grabbed his arm, stopping him in the empty hallway. Jacob, I need you to know something, before we do this. If it goes wrong, if we can't find what we need, if Lyle has covered his tracks too well, I want you to know that you tried. You gave me hope when I had none. And whatever happens, I'm grateful. Jacob looked at her. This woman who'd lost everything, who was still fighting, who trusted him enough to bet her freedom on a 3-day chase across the Atlantic, and felt something shift in his chest. "We're going to win this," he said. "I promise you." It was a promise he had no right to make, a guarantee he couldn't back up with anything but faith and stubbornness, and a refusal to let the bad guys win. But standing there in that courthouse hallway, with Vivian Storm's hand on his arm, and hope flickering in her eyes, Jacob Lane meant every word. They had 3 days to prove a conspiracy. 3 days to catch a billionaire. 3 days to save everything that mattered, and they were going to need every single second. The flight to Zurich left JFK at 6 p.m., and Jacob spent the taxi ride to the airport on the phone with his sister, trying to explain why he was leaving the country with a woman accused of fraud to chase down evidence in Switzerland. "You've lost your mind," Jessica said flatly. "Completely, totally lost your mind." "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" "Because it sounds like you're throwing away your job, your safety, and possibly your freedom on some crazy crusade for a woman you barely know." Jacob watched the city blur past the taxi window, the familiar skyline he'd lived beside his entire life. "She's innocent, Jess. I know she is." How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've spent 3 years watching guilty people in that courthouse. I know what guilt looks like. This isn't it." A long silence on the other end. Then, quieter. "Sarah would have done the same thing. You know that, right? She would have jumped in without thinking twice." Jacob's throat tightened. Is that criticism or approval? Both? Neither? I don't know. He heard her sigh. "Just come back, okay? Emma needs you. And she's already been through enough." "I will. I promise. 3 days." "Jacob, be careful. Please." When he hung up, he found Vivian watching him from across the taxi's back seat. She'd changed into travel clothes, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the courtroom armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Your sister thinks I'm leading you astray," she said. It wasn't a question. "My sister thinks I'm leading myself astray. You're just providing the destination." A small smile touched Vivian's lips. For what it's worth, she's probably right to worry. Probably. They lapsed into silence, both lost in their own thoughts, as the taxi navigated toward the airport. Jacob had never been on an international flight before. He'd never been west of Pennsylvania or north of Boston. His passport was 3 years old, obtained for a honeymoon trip to Ireland that Sarah had planned but never got to take. Now here he was, flying to Switzerland with a billionaire to hunt down evidence of corporate conspiracy. If someone had told him a week ago this would be his life, he would have laughed. At the airport, Vivian led them not to the main terminal, but to a private aviation building. Jacob stopped walking when he realized where they were going. "Vivian, I thought we were flying commercial." "We are flying, just not with 100 other passengers." She kept walking. "I still have access to the company jet. They can't touch that until the trial is over. A private jet." "Would you rather spend 8 hours in a middle seat?" Jacob couldn't argue with that logic, but stepping onto the sleek aircraft felt surreal. Leather seats, polished wood, a flight attendant who greeted them by name and asked about drink preferences. This wasn't his world. This was a world where people had jets the way normal people had used cars. But Vivian moved through it all with practiced ease, settling into a seat and immediately pulling out her laptop. By the time they were airborne, she had files spread across the table between them, building a map of Martin Lyle's business empire. "Alter Holdings has 17 subsidiary companies," she said, highlighting connections on her screen. "Most of them are shell corporations for acquiring distressed assets. But look at this one." She tapped a company called Zurich Medical Technologies. They specialize in healthcare AI. Direct competitor to StormTech. Jacob leaned forward, studying the organizational chart. So Lyle doesn't just want to destroy your company, he wants to absorb your technology into his own portfolio. Exactly. If StormTech collapses, the patents go up for auction. Lyle buys them for nothing, integrates the AI into ZMT, and suddenly he owns the future of medical diagnostics. How much would that be worth? Billions. Maybe tens of billions over the next decade. Jacob let out a low whistle. That's motive with a capital M. They worked through the night, piecing together Lyle's history, his business dealings, his pattern of acquiring failing companies. The flight attendant brought food that Jacob barely tasted, too focused on the puzzle taking shape before them. Somewhere over the Atlantic, exhaustion finally caught up with him. He closed his eyes for just a moment and woke to find a blanket draped over his shoulders and sunlight streaming through the oval windows. Vivian was still awake, still working, her face illuminated by the laptop screen. "Did you sleep at all?" Jacob asked, his voice rough. "Couldn't. Too much riding on this." She glanced at him, and he saw the fear beneath her composure. "What if we can't find anything? What if Lyle covered his tracks too well? Then we keep looking until we do." "Jacob, you have a daughter waiting for you. If this goes wrong, it won't." He sat up, pushing the blanket aside. "Vivian, people like Lyle always make mistakes. They get arrogant, they think they're untouchable. That's when they slip up. We just have to find where he slipped." She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes, the desperate need to trust that this insane plan would work. "Tell me about the first time you met him," Jacob said. "When he tried to buy StormTech. Every detail you remember." Vivian closed her laptop, her gaze going distant. "It was October 2020. 5 months after we'd published our first breakthrough study. Lyle invited me to dinner at some exclusive restaurant in Zurich. I thought it was a courtesy meeting, industry networking. Instead, he spent 3 hours explaining why I should sell him my company. What did he say? That I was brilliant but naive, that I didn't understand the business side of tech, that I'd be eaten alive by bigger companies if I didn't have proper backing." Her jaw tightened. "He offered me $200 million and a 5-year consulting contract, told me I could keep working on the technology while he handled the messy business details. But you said no." I said hell no. StormTech wasn't about money. It was about my mother, about every patient who deserved earlier detection, better odds. I wasn't going to sell that dream to a man who saw it as just another asset to flip. She looked at Jacob. He didn't take it well. When I stood to leave, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "You'll regret this, Ms. Storm. In this industry, you're either at the table or on the menu." A chill ran down Jacob's spine. That sounds like a threat. I thought he was just being a sore loser. But now... She trailed off, the implications hanging heavy between them. The jet began its descent into Zurich as dawn broke over the Alps. Jacob pressed his face to the window, watching mountains emerge from morning mist, like something from a fairy tale. Switzerland looked impossibly clean, impossibly ordered, a country built on precision and secrets. They landed at a private airfield, passed through customs with barely a glance at their passports, and stepped into a Swiss morning that smelled of fresh bread and alpine air. A rental car was waiting. Vivian had arranged everything remotely, and within 20 minutes, they were driving into Zurich's financial district. "Alter Holdings is headquartered here," Vivian said, navigating through narrow streets with surprising confidence. "Bahnhofstrasse, near the banking district. But we can't just walk in and demand to see Lyle." "No, but we can watch. See who comes and goes. Follow the patterns." They parked across from a sleek glass building that housed Alter Holdings offices and waited. Jacob had done stakeouts before, back in law school when he'd interned at a public defender's office. 90% boredom, 10% crucial observation. He'd learned to be patient, to notice the small details that others missed. 3 hours passed. Jacob bought coffee from a nearby cafe, terrible Swiss coffee that cost more than lunch back home. Vivian made calls to her remaining contacts in the tech world, fishing for information about Lyle's recent activities. Nothing useful emerged. Then at 11:30 a.m., a familiar face exited the building. "Vivian?" Jacob grabbed her arm. "Look." Paul Temple walked out of Alter Holdings like he owned the place, wearing an expensive suit Jacob had never seen before, laughing at something on his phone. No guilt, no fear, no sign that he'd just destroyed a woman's life and fled the country. Rage flooded through Jacob, hot and immediate. "That son of a—" "Follow him," Vivian said, her voice sharp. "We follow him." They gave Paul a half-block head start, then climbed out of the car and pursued on foot. The morning crowd provided cover as they tracked him through Zurich's pristine streets. Paul moved with the confidence of someone who believed he'd gotten away with it, stopping to buy flowers from a street vendor, checking his reflection in shop windows. He led them to a cafe near the lake, an upscale place with white tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. Through the window, Jacob watched Paul take a seat at a corner table. 5 minutes later, another man joined him. Jacob's breath caught. The man was in his 60s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed with the kind of face that belonged on the cover of Forbes. He greeted Paul with a handshake that suggested familiarity, comfort, conspiracy. "That's him," Vivian whispered. "That's Martin Lyle." They stood across the street watching through the cafe window as Paul and Lyle talked like old friends. At one point, Lyle handed Paul an envelope thick unmarked. Paul opened it, flipped through what looked like documents and nodded. "We need to hear what they're saying," Jacob muttered. "We can't get close enough without being spotted. Then we wait. See where they go next." The meeting lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, Lyle and Paul shook hands again, and Lyle departed in a chauffeured Mercedes. Paul stayed to finish his coffee, scrolling through his phone with that same self-satisfied smirk. "I want to punch him," Vivian said quietly. "Is that wrong?" "Probably healthy, actually." When Paul finally left the cafe, they followed him again. This time, he led them to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city, a modern building with keypads and security cameras. Paul used a code to enter, disappearing into the fluorescent-lit interior. "Storage unit," Jacob said. "He's hiding something here." "How do we get in?" "We wait until he leaves, then we figure it out." 20 minutes later, Paul emerged carrying a briefcase. He locked the door behind him, climbed into a taxi, and disappeared into traffic. Jacob and Vivian approached the storage facility. The entrance required a code, but the building's side door was slightly ajar, probably left open by another customer. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a long hallway lined with numbered units. "Which one?" Vivian asked. Jacob thought about the envelope Lyle had given Paul, about the careful way Paul had checked its contents. Something recent. Something Paul needed to access today. Whoa. He started walking, checking unit numbers. "Look for one that's been opened recently. Fresh scratches around the lock, disturbed dust." They searched systematically, Jacob using every detective trick he'd picked up from years of reading case files and watching investigation shows with Emma. Most units looked untouched, but one near the end of the corridor caught his eye. Unit 2913. The lock was new, shinier than the others. The floor in front of the door showed fresh scuff marks. And when Jacob knelt to examine the keypad, he found it a coffee stain on the number 7. Paul's morning coffee dripped while he fumbled with the code. "This is it," he said. "How do we get in?" Jacob studied the electronic lock. It was a simple 4-digit code system, the kind that prioritized convenience over security. He thought about Paul, arrogant, careless Paul, who probably used the same passwords for everything. "What was Paul's employee number at Stormtech?" he asked. Vivian pulled out her phone, scrolling through old HR files. 2913. Why would he? Oh. People are predictable. Jacob punched in the numbers. The lock beeped and clicked open. Inside the storage unit, they found exactly what they'd been looking for. Boxes of documents, external hard drives, a laptop connected to a portable printer. And on a small desk in the corner, a file marked Project Storm Final Phase. Jacob's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were the blueprints for Vivian's destruction. Every forged document, every fake transaction, every piece of fabricated evidence, all of it carefully documented with timestamps, instructions, and approval signatures. Martin Lyle's signature. "Oh my God," Vivian breathed. "It's all here. Everything." Jacob flipped through the pages, his legal mind cataloging the evidence. Emails between Lyle and Paul detailing the forgery plan. Bank transfer confirmations showing payment for corporate sabotage. A memo titled Stormtech Acquisition Strategy that laid out the entire conspiracy. Destroy Vivian's reputation, tank the company's value, acquire the patents at bankruptcy auction. And there, in Lyle's own handwriting on the final page, they were going to buy my silence with my own ruin. Wait, that wasn't right. Jacob read it again. The note wasn't about Vivian buying Lyle's silence. It was about Lyle's plan to buy Vivian's silence by ruining her so completely that she'd have no choice but to accept whatever deal he offered to make it stop. "This is premeditation," Jacob said. "This isn't just fraud. It's conspiracy, forgery, witness tampering, corporate espionage. Lyle orchestrated everything. We need to take this, all of it. We need to photograph everything first. If someone notices this is missing before we get back to New York, we're screwed." They spent the next hour documenting everything. Jacob used his phone to photograph every page, every email, every incriminating detail. Vivian recorded video of the storage unit establishing the chain of custody. When they were finished, they carefully selected the most damning originals, the ones with Lyle's actual signature, the bank records, the acquisition strategy memo. "We should go," Vivian said, glancing at her watch. "We've been here too long." They were repacking the evidence when they heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Multiple people moving quickly. Jacob's blood went cold. "Hide." There was nowhere to hide. The unit was 10 by 10 feet, mostly empty except for the boxes and desk. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then Paul's voice. "I'm telling you, I locked it. I always lock it." Another voice, older, commanding. "Then explain how the motion sensor detected activity." Lyle. "They'd triggered some kind of security system." Jacob looked at Vivian, saw his own terror reflected in her eyes. If they were caught here in Switzerland breaking into a storage unit, all the evidence in the world wouldn't matter. They'd be arrested. Vivian would be held in contempt. Everything would fall apart. The footsteps stopped right outside Unit 2913. Jacob made a decision. He shoved the folder of documents into Vivian's hands and pushed her toward the back corner of the unit. "When I move, you run. Don't stop, don't look back. Get to the car." "Jacob, no. Trust me." The door started to open. Jacob stepped forward, positioning himself directly in the doorway. When Paul and Lyle entered, they found him standing there alone, arms crossed, looking far more confident than he felt. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I think we need to talk." Paul's face went white. "What the hell, Lane? How did you—" "Martin Lyle." Jacob continued, focusing on the older man. "I'm Jacob Lane. I represent Vivian Storm, and I'm here to inform you that we know everything." Lyle's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, threat assessment. "Mr. Lane, the janitor playing lawyer, I've read about you. Then you know I don't give up easily. I know you're trespassing in a private storage facility in a foreign country. I could have you arrested right now." "You could, but then I'd have to tell the Swiss authorities why I'm here, show them the evidence of international wire fraud, corporate espionage conspiracy." Jacob gestured to the boxes around them. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in how you've been using Zurich banks to funnel illegal payments to sabotage American companies." Paul lunged forward. "You son of a—" Lyle held up a hand, stopping him. The older man's face was granite, but Jacob could see the wheels turning behind those cold eyes. "What do you want?" Lyle asked. The truth. In writing. A full confession detailing your conspiracy to destroy Stormtech. Lyle actually laughed. You must be joking. I'm dead serious. You write it, sign it, and we all walk away. I won't press charges for the storage break-in. You don't press charges against Vivian for things she didn't do. I don't make deals with janitors. Then make a deal with the federal prosecutor who's going to see all this evidence when I get back to New York. Jacob pulled out his phone, holding it up so Lyle could see the screen full of photographed documents. Every email, every bank transfer, every forged signature, all time-stamped, all documented, all admissible in court. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Lyle's face. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Am I? Because I'm the janitor who noticed what a dozen high-priced lawyers missed. I'm the man who found the metadata that proved your documents were forged. And I'm the father who will do whatever it takes to make sure justice gets done. Jacob took a step forward. You made a mistake, Lyle. You thought Vivian Storm was alone. You thought breaking her would be easy. But she's not alone anymore. And neither am I. Behind him, Jacob heard the faint sound of a car engine starting. Vivian had made it out. Relief flooded through him. Lyle heard it too. His expression darkened. Paul, go. Let her go, Jacob said quietly. Because if anything happens to her, if she's harmed in any way, every news outlet in America will have these documents by tomorrow morning. Your company, your reputation, your freedom, all of it gone. Is that really what you want? The silence stretched taut between them. Finally, Lyle smiled a thin, cruel expression. You think you've won. But you have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who destroys lives for profit. A man who bought a human being to do his dirty work. A man who's about to lose everything because he underestimated a woman brave enough to fight back. Jacob backed toward the door, his phone still raised, still recording. See you in court, Mr. Lyle. I'm looking forward to it. He walked out of that storage unit with his heart hammering and his hands shaking, expecting at any moment to be grabbed, stopped, arrested. But nothing happened. He made it to the hallway to the side exit to the street where Vivian was waiting in the rental car, with the engine running. Drive, he said, as he threw himself into the passenger seat. Vivian hit the gas. They didn't speak until they were on the highway heading back to the airport, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror. Then Vivian let out a shaky laugh. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. That was terrifying. You bought me time to escape. You faced down Martin Lyle alone. I may have peed myself a little. Vivian laughed, really laughed, the sound bright and genuine and free. And Jacob found himself laughing too, the adrenaline and fear transmuting into something like joy. They'd done it. Against all odds, against common sense, against every reasonable expectation, they'd found the evidence. They'd faced down the enemy. They'd won. Now, they just had to get home alive. The flight back to New York was nothing like the journey out. Where before there had been anxious planning and desperate hope, now there was exhausted triumph mixed with a gnawing awareness that they weren't safe yet. Jacob kept checking his phone, half expecting news that Lyle had called the Swiss police, that Interpol had issued warrants, that their gamble had backfired spectacularly. But the hours passed without incident. The jet climbed into cloudless European sky, and somewhere over the Atlantic, Jacob finally allowed himself to believe they might actually pull this off. Vivian sat across from him, the folder of evidence in her lap, like it was made of gold and glass. She'd barely let it out of her sight since they'd left the storage unit. Now she was going through each document again, memorizing every detail, building the narrative they'd present to Judge Morrison. What if it's not enough? She asked suddenly. What if Lyle's lawyers argue the evidence was obtained illegally? Jacob had been thinking about that too. The storage unit was opened. We didn't break in, we walked through an unlocked door and found a unit that was already accessible. And everything we photographed was in plain sight. That's a stretch. Maybe. But we also have Paul's employment records showing payments from Alter Holdings. We have the metadata from the forged documents. We have emails from Paul to Lyle's company. Even if the court throws out what we found in Zurich, we still have enough to establish reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt isn't the same as innocent. Jacob leaned forward, catching her eyes. Vivian, 24 hours ago, you had nothing. Your own lawyers had abandoned you. The jury thought you were guilty. Now you have documented proof of a conspiracy. That's not nothing. That's everything. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, you're right. But her hands still trembled slightly as she closed the folder. They landed at JFK at 4 a.m. on Friday morning, cutting it dangerously close to the 9 a.m. deadline. Jacob's sister was waiting in the arrivals area, Emma asleep against her shoulder. When Emma saw her father, she launched herself at him with a cry of "Daddy!" that made everyone in baggage claim turn and smile. Jacob caught her, lifted her, breathed in the familiar smell of her strawberry shampoo. Hey, baby girl, I missed you so much. You went on an airplane, a real airplane, to Europe. Emma's sleepy excitement was infectious. Did you see castles? Did you eat chocolate? I did all those things. Jacob lied, unwilling to tell his 6-year-old that he'd actually spent his time in Switzerland confronting corporate criminals in a storage unit. And I brought you something special. He'd bought a Swiss chocolate bar in the airport, overpriced, and probably not that different from American chocolate, but Emma's face lit up like he'd brought her the moon. Jessica was watching Vivian with unconcealed curiosity. So you're the billionaire who corrupted my brother? I prefer to think of it as inspiring him to break international laws, Vivian said with a tired smile. Thank you for taking care of Emma. She's family. That's what we do. Jessica's tone was pointed, a reminder that Jacob had responsibilities beyond this case. You bringing him back in one piece is appreciated. I'm trying my best. The drive back to Jacob's apartment was surreal, the familiar streets of Queens looking foreign after Switzerland's pristine orderliness. Emma chattered the whole way about school and Sophie's birthday party, and the butterfly project she was working on, normal, beautiful, mundane things that reminded Jacob why he was doing this. Not just for Vivian, but for Emma. To show her that standing up for what's right mattered even when it was terrifying. At his building, Jacob thanked his sister with a hug that said all the things he couldn't put into words. Then he carried Emma upstairs, tucked her back into bed, and stood in his tiny kitchen, staring at the evidence folder on the counter. 3 hours until court. 3 hours to prepare the most important presentation of his life. Vivian had gone to her apartment to shower and change, promising to meet him at the courthouse at 8:30. Now Jacob spread the documents across his kitchen table and started building his case, the way he'd been taught in law school, starting with the strongest evidence, building a narrative, anticipating counter-arguments. By the time the sun rose over Queens, he had 17 pages of notes and a coherent story that traced the conspiracy from Lyle's first acquisition attempt to Paul's flight to Zurich. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps, assumptions, leaps of logic that a good defense attorney could exploit. But it was true, and sometimes truth was enough. He showered, shaved, and put on the only suit he owned, the one he'd bought for Sarah's funeral and hadn't worn since. It was slightly too big now, weight he'd lost over 3 years of grief and single parenthood, but it would have to do. He wasn't a lawyer. He was barely qualified to be in that courtroom, but he'd be damned if he didn't look the part. Emma woke as he was tying his tie. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. You look fancy, Daddy. Big day at work, sweetheart. Are you going to help the nice lady? Jacob knelt down to her level. I'm going to try, but Em, I need you to understand something. Sometimes even when we try our hardest, things don't work out the way we want. Sometimes the bad guys win. Emma frowned, thinking this over with the seriousness she brought to all difficult concepts. But you said Mommy told you to be brave, to do the right thing even when it's scary. I did say that. So if you're brave and you do the right thing, that's winning. Even if the bad guys think they won, they didn't really. Because you were brave. Jacob pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her 6-year-old wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're busy mopping." He laughed despite the nerves churning in his stomach. "I love you, Emma Lane." "Love you too, Daddy. Go win." Jessica arrived to take Emma to school just as Jacob was leaving. His sister caught his arm at the door. "Whatever happens today," she said quietly, "Mom and Dad would have been proud. Sarah would have been proud. Hell, I'm proud even though you're crazy." "Thanks, Jess." "Don't thank me. Just come home tonight." The courthouse steps were already crowded with reporters when Jacob arrived. They surged forward when they spotted him, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Lane, is it true you went to Switzerland? Did you find new evidence? What does Vivian Storm have to say about—" Jacob pushed through without answering, his heart pounding. He wasn't used to being the story. He was used to being invisible, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Now everyone was looking. Inside, Vivian was waiting by the courtroom doors. She'd chosen a navy suit today, simple and professional, her hair pulled back. She looked nervous and determined and beautiful. And Jacob felt something shift in his chest that he didn't have time to examine. "You ready?" she asked. "Absolutely not. You—" "Terrified. Let's do this anyway." They walked into courtroom 12 together, and the gallery fell silent. Every seat was packed, journalists, legal observers, curious spectators who'd been following the trial. At the prosecution table, Andrea Chen looked up with an expression of grim determination. She knew something had changed. She just didn't know what yet. Judge Morrison entered precisely at 9 a.m., her face unreadable. "Ms. Storm, Mr. Lane, I see you've returned within the allotted time frame. I trust your trip was productive?" "Very productive, Your Honor," Jacob said, standing. "We have new evidence we'd like to present to the court, evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this case." Chen shot to her feet. "Your Honor, I object to any evidence obtained through questionable means during an unauthorized international investigation." "Ms. Chen, you'll have your chance to object once you've seen what Mr. Lane has to offer." The judge turned to Jacob. "Proceed." Jacob took a breath. This was it. No turning back now. "Your Honor, over the past 72 hours we've uncovered evidence of a deliberate conspiracy to frame Ms. Storm for corporate fraud. This conspiracy was orchestrated by Martin Lyle, CEO of Alter Holdings, a Swiss investment firm, with the assistance of Paul Temple, Ms. Storm's former executive assistant." He approached the bench, Vivian beside him, and began laying out the documents. The bank records showing payments from Alter Holdings to Paul Temple. The metadata analysis proving the key contract was forged. The emails documenting the conspiracy. And finally, the acquisition strategy memo, Lyle's blueprint for destroying Stormtech. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Judge Morrison examined each piece of evidence. Her expression remained neutral, but Jacob could see her eyes sharpening her attention, focusing with laser precision on what she was reading. When she looked up, her voice was carefully controlled. "Mr. Lane, these are serious allegations. Do you have any proof that these documents are authentic?" "We photographed everything in situ, Your Honor. We have video evidence of the storage facility where these documents were kept. And we have sworn testimony from Stormtech's CFO confirming the employment records and wire transfers." Chen was on her feet again. "Your Honor, without proper chain of custody, without verification." "Ms. Chen." The judge's tone could have frozen fire. "Your office entered evidence into this trial without verifying its authenticity. Evidence that Mr. Lane has now demonstrated was likely forged. I suggest you sit down and listen very carefully to what he has to say." The prosecutor sat, her face pale. Jacob continued walking the judge through the entire conspiracy. How Lyle had approached Vivian with an acquisition offer in 2020. How she'd rejected him. How Paul Temple had joined Stormtech 3 months later, planted, Jacob argued, as a corporate spy. How over 3.5 years Paul had gathered information, gained trust, positioned himself to execute the final phase of Lyle's plan. The forged documents weren't mistakes, Jacob said. They were weapons. carefully crafted tools designed to destroy Ms. Storm's reputation and tank Storm Tech's value. Once the company collapsed, Alter Holdings would acquire the patents for a fraction of their worth. It was theft disguised as justice. He turned to face the gallery, the cameras, the world watching this unfold. Your Honor, Vivian Storm didn't commit fraud. She was the victim of it. And the evidence proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. When Jacob returned to the defense table, his legs were shaking so badly he had to grip the chair to stay upright. Vivian's hand found his under the table, squeezing hard. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long time, reviewing the documents again. Finally, she looked at the prosecution. Ms. Chen, I'm going to give your office 24 hours to review this new evidence and determine how you wish to proceed. If you can demonstrate that Mr. Lane's allegations are false, we'll continue the trial. But if this evidence is authentic— She paused, and her voice went hard as granite. If this evidence is authentic, then your office has prosecuted an innocent woman based on fabricated documents provided by a co-conspirator. That would be a miscarriage of justice of the highest order. Your Honor, we acted in good faith. Good faith isn't good enough when someone's freedom is at stake. 24 hours, Ms. Chen. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell like thunder. The gallery erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, already calling their editors. Legal analysts huddled in excited clusters. And at the defense table, Vivian Storm put her face in her hands and cried. Jacob wanted to comfort her, but his own emotions were too raw, too overwhelming. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. The evidence was in front of the judge. The truth was out. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Vivian had a real chance at freedom. Outside the courtroom, they were mobbed by reporters. Jacob pushed through, keeping Vivian close, not answering questions until they were outside on the courthouse steps. The October sky was gray and heavy with coming rain, the air thick with moisture. Mr. Lane, what do you say to people who claim you're unqualified to practice law? Jacob stopped, turning to face the cameras. I'd say they're right. I'm not qualified. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a janitor who happened to notice what everyone else missed. But maybe that's the point. Maybe justice isn't about credentials or fancy degrees. Maybe it's about caring enough to look when others look away. Ms. Storm, how do you feel about the new evidence? Vivian stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tears still on her cheeks. I feel hope. For the first time in months, I feel hope. And I have Jacob Lane to thank for that. This man stood up when no one else would. He risked everything to find the truth. I don't have words for what that means to me. More questions came, but Jacob was done talking. He guided Vivian down the steps away from the chaos toward the quiet street beyond. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft, cold, cleansing. They stood on the sidewalk as the rain increased, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They'd been partners in this insane crusade for less than a week, but it felt like a lifetime. They'd flown to Switzerland together, faced down criminals together, built a case that might actually save her life. What happens now? Vivian asked quietly. Now we wait. The prosecution reviews the evidence, probably realizes their entire case was built on lies, and hopefully drops the charges. And if they don't? Then we go to trial and we fight. But Vivian, we've already won the part that matters. We proved you were framed. We exposed the conspiracy. Even if they're too proud to admit they were wrong, the jury will see the truth. She turned to face him, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears. You gave me my life back. You gave yourself your life back. You fought when everyone told you to give up. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. That took more courage than anything I did. Jacob. She stepped closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face. I don't know how to thank you. He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through their expensive courtroom clothes, but neither of them moved. There was something happening here, something that went beyond gratitude or partnership, something that felt like possibility. You don't have to thank me, Jacob said softly. You just have to keep fighting, keep building. Keep being the person who changes the world instead of letting it change you. I can't do it alone. You're not alone. Not anymore. And there on a rain-soaked New York sidewalk with reporters watching from the courthouse steps and the city rushing past in its endless hurry, Vivian Storm kissed Jacob Lane. It was gentle and desperate and real. It tasted like rain and hope and new beginnings. It was the kiss of two people who'd survived something terrible together and come out the other side transformed. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Jacob was laughing. That's going to be on the news. I don't care. Let them talk. I'm done hiding who I am and what I feel. Good, because I'm done being invisible. They stood in the rain, holding hands, letting the water wash away the fear and doubt and pain of the past months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The prosecution's response, the media frenzy, the long road to rebuilding Vivian's reputation and company. But right now, in this moment, they had something more valuable than vindication. They had each other, and they had hope. The next morning, Jacob woke to his phone buzzing with notifications. Text after text, email after email, all saying the same thing in different ways. The prosecution was dropping all charges against Vivian Storm. Andrea Chen had released a statement acknowledging serious irregularities in the evidence and announcing a full investigation into Martin Lyle and Alter Holdings. Paul Temple had been charged in absentia with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Interpol had issued warrants. It was over. Jacob sat on the edge of his bed reading the news over and over, unable to quite believe it. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against powerful enemies, against every reasonable expectation, they'd won. His phone rang. Vivian's name on the screen. Did you see? Her voice was shaking. Jacob, did you see the news? I saw. We did it. We actually did it. Yeah, we did. There was a moment of silence, both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Then Vivian spoke again, softer now. Come to the courthouse. One more time. I need to see Judge Morrison thank her for giving us a chance. And I want you there with me. An hour later, they stood in Judge Morrison's chambers. The judge looked at them with something that might have been respect. Ms. Storm, Mr. Lane, I'm pleased to see justice has prevailed, however circuitously. Your Honor, I wanted to thank you, Vivian said, for listening, for giving us the chance to present our evidence. A lesser judge might have dismissed Jacob's claims as fantasy. Morrison smiled slightly. Mr. Lane was persuasive, and more importantly, he was right. She turned to Jacob. You have a gift for this work, young man. Have you considered finishing your law degree? Jacob hadn't thought about it in years. The dream he'd abandoned when Sarah died, when survival became more important than ambition. But now... Maybe, he said. Maybe I will. When you do, my door is always open. The legal profession could use more people who care about truth over victory. As they left the courthouse for the final time, the sun was breaking through October clouds, painting Manhattan in gold and amber light. Vivian took Jacob's hand, and they walked down those marble steps together, equals at last. So what now? Jacob asked. Back to running an empire. Eventually. But first I need to rebuild. Not just the company, but everything. My reputation, my team, my life. She glanced at him. I was hoping you might help with that. Vivian, I'm a janitor. I don't know anything about running a tech company. You're not a janitor. You're the man who saved my life. And you have something most business executives never develop: integrity. Empathy. The ability to see what others miss. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Come work with me. Help me rebuild StormTech into something better than it was. A company that actually values people, that puts purpose before profit. Jacob thought about his tiny apartment, his night shifts, his life of quiet, invisible survival. Then he thought about Emma, about the example he wanted to set for her. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. The offer stands. But even as he said it, Jacob knew what his answer would be. Because Vivian Storm hadn't just given him a job offer. She'd given him back the future he thought he'd lost. And he wasn't going to waste it. 3 weeks later, Jacob stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., adjusting a tie that still felt foreign around his neck. Behind him, Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub, swinging her legs and offering color commentary. "The blue one is better," she announced. "The red one makes you look like you're going to a wedding." Jacob switched ties for the third time. "When did you become a fashion expert?" "I've always been an expert. You just never asked." He smiled at her reflection. In the weeks since the trial ended, something had shifted between them. Emma seemed older, somehow more perceptive. Or maybe Jacob was just finally paying attention. Today was his first official day at Stormtech. Not as a janitor, not as an unlikely legal defender, but as special advisor to the CEO. Vivian had created the position specifically for him, though Jacob suspected it was partly because she didn't know what else to call someone who didn't fit into any traditional corporate category. "You nervous, Daddy?" "Terrified." "But you're gonna do it anyway." "Yeah, baby girl, I'm gonna do it anyway." Emma hopped down from the bathtub and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Mommy would say you're being brave." Jacob's chest tightened, the way it always did when Emma mentioned Sarah. But the pain was different now, softer somehow. Less like a wound, and more like a memory of one. "She would," he agreed. "And she'd probably tell me to stop fussing with the tie and just go already." "So go already." Emma grinned up at him. "And bring me back something cool from the fancy office." The Stormtech headquarters building was in Lower Manhattan, a glass and steel tower that caught the morning sun and threw it back in brilliant diamonds of light. Jacob had passed it a dozen times on his way to the courthouse, never imagining he'd one day walk through its doors as anything other than invisible. The lobby was all modern minimalism, white marble, floating staircases, a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of stone. The security guard checked Jacob's name against a list and handed him a badge with his photo already printed on it. "Elevators are to your left, Mr. Lane. Top floor." Mr. Lane. Not "hey buddy," or "excuse me," or the silent dismissal he'd grown used to. Mr. Lane, like he mattered. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending into another world. When the doors opened, Jacob found himself in a space that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Plants everywhere, real ones thriving. And people, dozens of them, moving with purpose, talking, laughing, working. A young woman approached him immediately. "Mr. Lane, I'm Keisha, Ms. Storm's executive assistant. Welcome to Stormtech." "Thank you. And please call me Jacob." "Jacob, then." She smiled warmly. "Vivian's in a meeting right now, but she asked me to give you the tour and get you settled. Follow me." As Keisha led him through the office, Jacob couldn't help but notice how different it felt from the sterile corporate environments he'd cleaned for 3 years. People here seemed genuinely engaged with their work. He saw engineers clustered around monitors pointing excitedly at lines of code. Scientists in a glass-walled lab examining what looked like brain scans. An entire wall covered in patents and awards. "This is your office," Keisha said, opening a door near the end of the hall. Jacob stepped inside and stopped. The space was modest by executive standards. No corner office, no power desk. But it had windows that looked out over the city, and a bookshelf already stocked with legal texts. On the desk sat a single item, a framed photograph of him and Emma taken at her last birthday party. He hadn't given that photo to anyone. "Vivian thought you might want something familiar," Keisha said quietly. "She wanted you to feel at home here." Jacob picked up the frame, his throat tight. Emma's gap-toothed grin, his arm around her shoulders, both of them covered in birthday cake frosting. It was home condensed into a single moment. "Thank you," he managed. "Coffee's in the break room, Bathrooms are down the hall, and if you need anything at all, just call my extension. It's programmed into your phone. Keisha paused at the door. And Jacob, I just wanted to say what you did for Vivian, for all of us, really. Stormtech wouldn't exist without you. So, thank you. When she left, Jacob sat down in his new chair and tried to process the surreality of it all. 4 weeks ago, he'd been mopping floors. Now he had an office, a title, people thanking him for saving a company he'd never worked for. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Meeting's running long, lunch at 1. We need to talk about the Lyle situation. Martin Lyle. The name still sent a chill through Jacob. The Swiss authorities had raided Alter Holdings' offices, but Lyle himself had disappeared. Rumors placed him in Dubai, Singapore, the Cayman Islands. Wherever he was, he'd taken his resources and connections with him, vanishing into the global network of people too rich to face consequences. It bothered Jacob more than he wanted to admit. They'd won the battle, but the war felt unfinished. At 1 p.m., Jacob found Vivian in her office, a space that was somehow both luxurious and unpretentious. She'd traded her courtroom suits for dark jeans and a Stormtech hoodie, her hair in a messy bun, looking more like a grad student than a CEO. You came, she said, and her smile was radiant. You thought I wouldn't. I thought you might wake up and realize you could do anything you wanted now. Every law firm in New York has called offering you positions. Stanford wants you to guest lecture. You're famous, Jacob. You could write your own ticket. Jacob settled into the chair across from her desk. I don't want fame. I want to do something that matters. Then you're in the right place. Vivian pulled up something on her computer. Look at this. It was a graph showing Stormtech's diagnostic AI performance over the past year. The line had been climbing steadily until the trial, where it dropped sharply. But in the past 3 weeks, it had shot back up like a rocket. Hospitals are calling again, Vivian said. Research institutions want partnerships. The medical community is rallying behind us. Because the truth came out. Because people saw that we're the real deal, not some fraud operation. That's incredible. It's more than incredible. It's vindication. It's proof that what we're building matters. She turned the monitor so he could see it better. But we're not just rebuilding the old Stormtech. I want to create something new, something better, and I need your help to do it. Vivian, I don't know anything about medical technology. You know about truth, about integrity, about standing up when things are wrong. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I've been thinking about what went wrong, how Paul was able to do what he did. And I realized we'd built a company culture where nobody questioned authority, where loyalty meant blind obedience. That's toxic. That's how corruption takes root. So what do you want to do differently? I want to build a company where everyone matters, where the person mopping floors has just as much right to speak up as the CEO, where we actively encourage people to question, to notice, to care. She smiled. I want to build a company like you, basically. Jacob laughed despite himself. That's a terrible business model. Maybe, but it's the right model, and I think together we can make it work. Over the next hour, they talked through Vivian's vision. A new employee handbook that prioritized transparency and whistleblower protections, an anonymous reporting system for concerns, regular town halls where anyone could ask anything. It was ambitious, maybe naive, but it was also exactly what Jacob had always believed a workplace should be. There's something else, Vivian said as they were finishing. The Lyle situation. The Swiss authorities found evidence linking him to 3 other corporate sabotage operations. He's done this before, found promising companies, planted insiders, destroyed them from within, then bought the pieces. We weren't his first target. But we were his first failure. Exactly. And he's not going to let that go. The FBI's tracking him, but... She trailed off, worry clouding her features. Jacob reached across the desk and took her hand. It had become natural in the weeks since the trial, this casual physical connection between them. He can't touch you now, The truth is out. You're protected. I'm protected, but you're not. Jacob, you humiliated him in that storage unit. You exposed his entire operation. Men like Lyle don't forget that. Are you saying he might come after me? I'm saying we need to be careful. Both of us. The thought should have terrified Jacob. Maybe it would have a month ago. But something had changed in him during that confrontation in Zurich. He'd faced down a man who could destroy lives with a phone call, and he'd won. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Let him come, Jacob said quietly. I'm not running. Not anymore. That evening, Jacob picked Emma up from his sister's place and took her to their favorite pizza joint in Queens. It was a Tuesday night ritual they'd maintained since Sarah died, one small constant in a world that kept changing. Emma devoured her pepperoni slice while telling Jacob about her day in exhausting detail. Her teacher had started a unit on the solar system. Sophie had brought her pet hamster for show and tell. The cafeteria had served mystery meat that tasted like sadness. Jacob listened, really listened in a way he hadn't always managed during the past 3 years. He'd been so focused on survival, on making it through one more day, one more shift, one more lonely night. He'd forgotten how to be present. Daddy, you're being weird, Emma said, pausing mid-bite. What do you mean? You keep smiling at me like I said something funny, but I'm just telling you about lunch. Jacob laughed. I'm just happy, sweetheart. Is that okay? Emma considered this seriously. Yeah, that's okay. You should be happy more. I'm working on it. Is it because of Vivian? The question caught Jacob off guard. What makes you ask that? Sophie's mom said you have a girlfriend. She saw you on the news, kissing in the rain. Emma made a face. Gross. Jacob felt his cheeks heat. He'd known the kiss would make headlines, but he hadn't thought about how to explain it to his 6-year-old daughter. Vivian's not... We're not... It's complicated. Do you like her? The honest answer was yes. More than liked her. In the weeks since the trial, they'd talked every day, met for coffee, shared meals, built something that felt like the beginning of something real. But it was also terrifying. He hadn't been with anyone since Sarah. Hadn't wanted to be. The thought of opening his heart again, of risking that kind of loss? Yeah, he admitted. I like her. Is that okay with you? Emma shrugged with the magnificent indifference of childhood. I guess. Is she nice? Very nice. And she's really smart. She builds technology that helps sick people get better. Like Mommy needed? Jacob's heart clenched. Yeah, baby. Like Mommy needed. Emma was quiet for a moment, working through something in her mind. When she spoke again, her voice was small. Do you think Mommy would be mad if you liked someone else? Jacob set down his pizza and pulled Emma into his lap, not caring that they were in a crowded restaurant. Your Mommy loved us more than anything in the world. And you know what she told me right before she died? She made me promise to keep living, to be happy, to find joy again. His voice cracked. She wouldn't be mad, Emma. She'd be proud of us for being brave enough to keep going. Emma hugged him tight. I miss her. I miss her too, every single day. But missing her doesn't mean we can't be happy. It just means we carry her with us while we find new happiness. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter holding each other in a pizza place in Queens, mourning and healing all at once. The weeks turned into months. October became November, and then December arrived with the first snow of the season. Jacob settled into his role at StormTech, discovering that he had a knack for spotting problems before they became crises, and for translating between the technical team and the business side. Vivian called him her bullshit detector, and he wore the title with pride. The media attention gradually faded. There were other scandals, other stories, other unlikely heroes to fixate on. Paul Temple was arrested in Monaco, trying to board a yacht bound for international waters. Martin Lyle remained at large, but Interpol had frozen his assets and issued warrants in 43 countries. He was a rich man with nowhere to spend his money. And through it all, Jacob and Vivian grew closer. It happened in small moments, working late together, her head on his shoulder as they reviewed contracts. Sunday afternoons when she'd come to Queens and they'd take Emma to the park, the three of them building snowmen and drinking hot chocolate. Quiet dinners where they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, fears, hopes. Emma adored Vivian, especially after Vivian set up a special junior scientist lab at StormTech, where Emma could do experiments after school. Watching his daughter in a tiny lab coat carefully pipetting colored water between test tubes, while Vivian explained the scientific method, Jacob felt something slot into place in his chest. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting Sarah, but making room for new love alongside the old. In January, StormTech held its first company-wide town hall under the new leadership. The entire staff gathered in the main atrium. Engineers, scientists, administrators, security guards, janitorial staff. Everyone. Vivian stood at the front, looking out at the sea of faces. 6 months ago, this company almost died. Not because of bad technology or poor business decisions, but because of lies. Because someone with power decided that truth didn't matter as much as profit. Her voice carried clearly through the space. But we survived. And we survived because one person decided that truth mattered more than his own safety, that doing the right thing was worth risking everything. She gestured to Jacob standing off to the side. Jacob Lane saved StormTech. But more than that, he reminded all of us why we're here. We're not here to make money. We're here to save lives. To give people the chance my mother never got. The chance his wife never got. The chance that thousands of patients deserve. The room erupted in applause. Jacob felt his face flush, uncomfortable with the attention, but also moved by it. Vivian waited for the applause to die down. Going forward, we're implementing some changes. Every employee, regardless of position, will have direct access to an ethics hotline. We're establishing a whistleblower protection program, and we're creating a new core value: integrity over everything. If you see something wrong, you speak up, no matter who's involved. No matter the cost. She paused, her eyes finding Jacob's across the room. Because that's what heroes do. And I want this company full of heroes. More applause, and this time Jacob joined in, clapping for Vivian and her courage to transform pain into purpose. After the town hall, as people were filing out, a woman approached Jacob. She was in her 50s, wearing a janitor's uniform, carrying a mop. Mr. Lane, I'm Patricia. I work the night shift cleaning the labs. Hi, Patricia, and please call me Jacob. She smiled, but her eyes were serious. I just wanted to say thank you. I've worked janitorial for 30 years, and nobody's ever made me feel like I mattered, like my perspective was worth anything. But what you did, standing up like that, it changed things for people like me, made us visible. Jacob shook her hand, humbled. You were always visible, Patricia. People just weren't looking. Well, they're looking now, so thank you. As she walked away, Vivian appeared at Jacob's elbow. Making friends. Realizing I've been given a gift I don't deserve. You deserve it. You earned it. She threaded her arm through his. Come on, I have something to show you. She led him to the main lab, where the StormTech AI system was displayed on a massive wall screen. The visualization showed a human brain in stunning detail, with areas lighting up in different colors. We just got approval from the FDA, Vivian said quietly. Full commercial rollout. 20 hospitals are implementing the system this quarter. By this time next year, we'll be in 100 hospitals. Do you know what that means? Jacob stared at the screen, at the technology that could catch tumors, aneurysms, diseases before they became fatal. You're going to save thousands of lives. We're going to save thousands of lives. You and me. This company. Everyone here. Her voice was thick with emotion. My mother died because no one saw the aneurysm in time. Your wife died because the cancer wasn't caught early enough. But Jacob, We can change that. For other people, other families. We can make sure fewer children lose their mothers, fewer husbands lose their wives. He turned to her, saw tears streaming down her face, and pulled her into his arms. "We're going to change everything," he whispered. "Promise me," she said against his chest. "Promise me you'll stay, that we'll do this together. I promise, for as long as you'll have me." She pulled back to look at him, her dark eyes searching his. "What if I want forever?" Jacob's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this for months, both of them scared to name what was growing between them. But standing here in this lab, surrounded by the evidence of what they could accomplish together forever, didn't seem nearly long enough. "Then forever it is," he said, and kissed her. It was different from the rain-soaked kiss outside the courthouse. That had been desperate, adrenaline-fueled, the kiss of two people who'd survived something terrible. This was deliberate, tender, the kiss of two people choosing each other with clear eyes and open hearts. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vivian laughed. "I love you, Jacob Lane. Is that crazy? We've only known each other 6 months. I've learned a lot about crazy in the past 6 months. This isn't it." He touched her face gently. "I love you too. And I think Sarah would have really liked you." Yeah. She always said I needed someone who'd challenge me, push me to be better, someone who'd see the version of me I was too scared to become." He smiled. "She'd have loved watching you force me to be brave." "You were always brave. You just needed a reason to show it." Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. Jacob enrolled in night classes to finish his law degree, balancing work and school and fatherhood with Vivian's help. Emma thrived, her butterfly project winning the school science fair and earning her an invitation to present at the citywide competition. In April, the FBI finally caught Martin Lyle trying to cross from Dubai into Oman. He was extradited to the United States, charged with conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and a dozen other crimes. His trial was scheduled for the fall. When Jacob heard the news, he felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't always swift, but sometimes it was inevitable. Paul Temple took a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, in exchange for testimony against Lyle. Jacob didn't attend the sentencing, but Vivian did. She came home quiet and thoughtful. "How was it?" Jacob asked. "Sad. He looked so small in that courtroom. I kept thinking about how he used to bring me coffee every morning, how he'd smile and ask about my weekend. And it was all a lie, all of it." She shook her head. "I'm glad he's going to prison. But I'm also sad that someone could throw away their integrity so easily. Some people never had integrity to begin with. Maybe. Or maybe we all have it until we're tested, and some of us just fail the test." Jacob pulled her close. "You passed every test, Vivian, even when it cost you everything. We passed together." In June, on a perfect summer evening, Jacob and Vivian hosted Stormtech's first annual family open house. The entire staff was invited to bring their families to show their children and partners what they did all day to celebrate not just the company, but the community they'd built. Emma ran through the halls with other employees' kids, a pack of them giggling and exploring, and leaving sticky fingerprints on the glass walls. The lab was transformed into a hands-on science museum with demonstrations and experiments. The atrium featured a display chronicling Stormtech's history, including, at Jacob's insistence, a photo of the storage unit in Zurich, where everything had changed. As the sun set, painting the city in gold and amber, Jacob stood at the windows and watched the celebration below. Parents and children, engineers and janitors, scientists and administrators, all of them part of something bigger than themselves. Vivian appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "That a year ago I was mopping these floors, invisible, forgotten, barely surviving." He turned to look at her. "And now I'm here, with you, building something that matters. It feels like someone else's life." "It's your life, Jacob. The life you earned. We earned. Together." Below them, Emma was showing a group of kids how to look at cells under a microscope, her voice carrying up through the atrium as she explained what she was seeing. Vivian's head rested on Jacob's shoulder, her arm around his waist. And for the first time since Sarah died, Jacob felt complete. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be fully gone, but because he'd learned to carry it alongside joy, to let new love grow in the spaces loss had left behind. "I have something for you," Vivian said, pulling back slightly. From her pocket she produced a small envelope. Jacob opened it to find a check for an amount that made his eyes widen. "Vivian, this is your share of the company. I'm making you a partner, Jacob, not just in name, but in ownership. Stormtech is as much yours as it is mine." "I can't accept this." "You can and you will. Because you saved this company. You saved me. And I want to build the future with you. All of it. The company, a life, everything." Jacob looked at the check, then at Vivian, then down at Emma, teaching children about science with the same passion her father had once brought to studying law. He thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made, about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. "Okay," he said, "let's build everything." That night, after the guests had left and the building was quiet, Jacob did something he hadn't done in years. He took the mop from the janitorial closet, his old mop, the one he'd been using the day everything changed, and he cleaned the atrium floor one last time. Vivian found him there working methodically across the marble and started to ask what he was doing. But she stopped, understanding somehow that this was important. This was closure. When Jacob finished, he set the mop aside and looked at her. "I needed to remember," he said. "The man I was. The work I did. The invisibility I accepted because I thought it was all I deserved." He crossed to her, taking both her hands. "I needed to remember so I never forget how far we've come, how much we've changed, how love and courage can transform everything." Vivian kissed him softly. "So what now?" Jacob smiled. "Now we go home. We tuck Emma into bed. We plan tomorrow and next week and next year. We build the company we dreamed of. We save lives. We love each other. We keep being brave." "That's a good plan." "It's the only plan that matters." They walked out of Stormtech together, hand in hand, leaving the lights on for the cleaning crew that would come in overnight. People doing important work that others rarely noticed. People who deserved to be seen. As they drove through the city toward home, Emma asleep in the back seat, and Vivian's hand warm in his. Jacob thought about the day he'd stood up in that courtroom and yelled, "I will defend her!" How terrifying it had been. How impossible it had seemed. But he'd done it anyway. He'd stood when everyone told him to stay seated. He'd spoken when silence would have been safer. He'd chosen courage over comfort, truth over security, love over fear. And in choosing those things, he'd found the life he was always meant to live. The life where the janitor became a hero, the CEO became human, and together they built something that mattered more than money, or power, or reputation. They built a legacy of truth, of redemption, of the courage to stand when no one else would. And that legacy, that beautiful, impossible, hard-won legacy, would outlive them all. Because love is not what you say, it's what you do.